Live.
Think if you click on it, it should move.
But that means I can't move the mouse though, right?
No, you can. See, look at the mouse.
Oh, but how do I then?
Because I think if you click on it,
Oh,
see? I said it
oh,
so
I see. I can
you
do
don't
that.
even have to worry about it now.
Okay.
You want me to take it back to the beginning?
No, that's the beginning.
Okay.
Okay.
I made it easy for you.
Thank you.
I'm an easy button.
Are we live?
You're live. You are
Okay.
ready to go.
Okay.
I'll
Thank
take
you everyone for being here at the inaugural Waldoboro Origins Committee meeting. So tonight will be mostly presentations by myself, giving an overview of the purpose or goals of the committee and possible ways we might be able to achieve that. And also you'll hear from Harbor Mitchell, an archaeologist who's been doing archaeological research in the area. But before we get to that, we have to take care of some official business because this is our first meeting. So we have 5 approved members, and I would just like those members to say your name, your connection to Waldoboro, maybe something about what interests you in regards to history in general or the history of Waldoboro, and anything else you want to say about yourself. So I'll start. My name is Michael Amico. I moved to Waldoboro recently in the past year. And I am trained as a historian. I specialize in the history of America. And I have focused on the question of feelings and emotions as an entryway into understanding history. And I've been frustrated by academic institutions. I feel like the work I was doing there didn't matter outside those walls. And so I've been looking for ways to not only apply what I was developing there, but further develop those thoughts. And I'm excited to do that here in Waldoboro. So that's why I'm here in this room. So why don't we go next?
My name is Mike Martunis. Originally from Worcester, Mass. I moved here in 2005. I live on the Gethner Road with my wife and 2 children. I received a Bachelor of Science in 1998 in archaeology and anthropology. I worked doing contract archaeology, mostly this side of the Mississippi, from Iowa, Tennessee, Louisiana, and all over New England. One of the difficulties with archaeology in New England is in the winter. And I got laid off, and I ended up getting a job in environmental consulting as a geologist. So when I moved to Maine in 2005, I got a environmental job at Dragon Products, cement plant in Thomaston. And I've been the environmental manager at that facility since 2008, sorry, which is where I came from. Today, we are still operating. I saw the article about Harbor Mitchell in the newspaper and inquired about the committee. I haven't practiced archaeology or been in the field in many years, but I'm still interested in it and hope to offer something to the group.
Great, thank you, Mike.
My name is Lucy Nutter. I'm a retired psychiatrist, retired as of about 6 months ago. My husband and I moved here full-time from Houston, Texas in 2021, but we owned property in Waldoboro since 2016. I think the most beautiful piece of property in Waldoboro by the Goose River and Goose River Cove. We're about the last house on South 220 in Waldoboro. As a psychiatrist, my work has always been focused on people's stories and people's history and how it shapes who they are and how they feel about things and how they look at the world. And I think that's true for institutions and towns as well, where we came from and who we are as a town. I love Waldoboro. I'm in favor of doing anything at all that makes Waldoboro it's a unique place and helps to enhance its beauty and its uniqueness for the community and for others. And I was going to be an archaeologist when I was a little kid, but I went to medical school instead. So
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Harbor is, so technically, to be a member of the committee, you have to be a resident of Waldoboro. So Harbor doesn't live in Waldoboro, so he is serving an advisory role to our committee. But please just
All right.
briefly introduce yourself. Yeah.
My name is Harbor Mitchell. I've been doing archaeological research in Waldoboro for the last 3 years. And I began in Lincolnville, oddly enough, on the site of a man named Ulmer, who was born here in 1751. And that brought me to Waldoboro in terms of my research. I worked for about 25 years in contract archaeology, almost exclusively in Maine. It's, as Michael pointed out, difficult to do in the winter. So we worked in lumber yards, boat yards, things of that nature in the off season. My interest in Waldoboro really grew as a result of the 3 years of research. It became very clear that Waldoboro is blessed with literally with hundreds of colonial, pre-colonial, and post-colonial sites, not to mention Native American and other forms of sites, whether it's boat building sites or that sort of thing. And it just seemed to me such a gift that it needed to be advanced in some way. And so I brought it to the select board and others, Michael and others, Bill. And together we talked about that, and the town adopted its own comprehensive plan requirement to put a committee like this together. And that's kind of where I come from. I live in Waterville. My wife is a United Methodist pastor, so I go where the Lord requires, or my wife.
Great, thank you.
I'm Bill Maxwell. In July, I will have only lived in Waldoboro 58 years. I'm a local boy, went to Madomic, all the local schools, graduated Madomic Valley, and went right to work for all local contractors, a plumber, electrician, and a heating gentleman right in town. Then worked at Dow Furniture for 8 years, and then went to work for Bob Butler and the Jojoba Company, still with them. That'll be 11 years this July. I've been very active in my community, 33 years on the fire department, 8 of them, which is assistant chief. Ambulance department for a few years, driving ambulance. Little League for over 20 years as a coach and a president. Loved history in school. Bill Blodgett was my history teacher, and when you listen to his lectures, it gets you rather excited. 2013, the fire department put on a celebration of the anniversary of the fire department, and I got to collaborate with Jean Lawrence on putting together the history of the Waldoboro Fire Department. And at that time, she asked me to come to an annual meeting that July, and when I went, they elected me as their vice president. I think she had a hidden agenda. She needed a vice president. So I worked with Jean since 2013 up until her untimely death. The society voted me in as president in 2023. Like Harbor said, I got to meet Harbor about 3 years ago. I've been on some digs with Harbor, and it's even more, got more of a fire under me. The biggest thing I found that when people pass on, we lose their stories. So it's a good time to record their stories, write their stories down. There's a gentleman at the table, he knows, there's a gentleman named Richard Wallace, who you just listen to his stories. And Jean, same thing, you just listen to her stories. So that's about it.
Thank you, Bill. Carolyn?
My name is Carolyn Bryant Sarles. My husband and I honeymooned in Maine, which was more than 40 years ago, and came back every summer for ages. Finally bought a place on Gross Neck and then later on Dutch Neck. This was while we were still working. When we retired, we started coming up here increasingly long periods of time and moved to Maine full-time in 2010. The house here on Dutch Neck is a summer place, and we decided not to try to make it into a winter place. Instead, we also have a place down in Brunswick for the winter. So he's gone now, and looking around for some things to do. I guess I found this committee and thought, oh, I have a background. I'm a music historian,
Right.
musicologist. So that's my sort of historical background. And I guess that's what drew me.
Yeah.
Just the idea of history drew me to the committee.
Great. Okay, so we have a very diverse among these 5 people, representation of Waldoboro, actually. So Bill, I know we need to vote on a chair. Should we do that now or at the end of the meeting? We can
I
do it now.
would say we do it now, and I would like to nominate Michael Amico as the chairman of this committee.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? So all those members in favor?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that was the official business. So thank you very much for hearing the introductions. So I'm going to be referencing what's on the screen, but I also took out some of the text that I'm speaking that you'll see and printed it out on the sheet that I handed out. So you can refer to that now or later. Not everything I say will be on the screen, but you can look towards the screen during the presentation. So I think a driving question of what we're after is what makes Waldoboro historically speaking. And you heard from Harbor and Bill a little bit about the prehistory of this committee. Harbor's archaeological research instigated a conversation about the earliest settlements of the area. And he met with Bill and Bob Butler on the select board, and they put together this Waldoboro Origins sort of project discussion group. And I think the question was then, what would it mean to revisit our origins, to learn more about them and also increase their accessibility to us in the present? And the first thing I put up there on the slide is, what do we mean by origins? Obviously, we mean the beginnings of the colonial settlement of the area, but also more broadly, the conditions and circumstances of that settlement that still shape us today, as well as the responses that those conditions and circumstances demand from us on a daily basis, ever renewing our origins. And I'll talk a little bit about what those conditions and circumstances that still remain are. So after continuing the conversation with Bill and Harbor, we decided to form this official committee. And I've listed some of the broad roles and goals of the committee. Think critically about the ongoing effect of history on the present, develop a more expansive framework and set of activities to engage the community historically, increase historical awareness and accountability, cultivate historical identity, inform the growth and development of the town in a historically accountable way. Now, most of you probably know that I'm involved in the town in other ways. I'm very, very interested in creating a community that can grow and prosper. And so here, I guess I'm asking, what is history's role in community growth? How can historical awareness or even the practice of history actually work to create a better environment for the community to grow and prosper? So it's a high, lofty goal, but I think it's doable, and if we do it, it would be absolutely unique to Waldoboro. Okay, so one important point in terms of considering how to make the current community grow and prosper is to understand some of the key conditions of Waldoboro's historical development that continue to affect our lives today. So I've listed some of them up on the slide. One is our location as an outpost on the frontier of the frontier. This was certainly the case in the 18th century, but in many ways it is actually still the case that we do live on the sort of edge of America in many ways. Number two would be related to that, exposure to the elements, where people are forced to confront constant changes of nature, of the tides, of the forces around you. And also related to those two, especially the first one, relationship to authority as distant, removed, suspended, or continually questioned, and how that actually generated forms of self-governance and sovereignty over time that are still with us today. So these conditions, I think, still hold, but of course, we experience them today a little bit differently. At first, they were all experienced from the mid-1700s through a century of war and various other traumas. And that is very, very important because of those circumstances, it shaped the community in very specific ways. So one of the things that it did was, create in some form, a defensive way of life and a weary and self-protective conservatism. We can see this in many, many forms. There's a lot more to say about it. But it also, those same conditions also are what cultivated an ethic of survival and adaptation, creativity, whereby the people here have cultivated ongoing and changing kinds of abundance and built a refuge. And I would suggest that indeed people have come to Waldoboro because of its distinguishing conditions, this exposed outpost of distant authority. And they come here to be away, apart from busy areas, to work more freely and non-institutionally, to experience beauty, to expose themselves to a wilder nature and its many unknowns. And as I was thinking about this, I started describing it, both the negative and the positive of these conditions, as living and feeling on the edge, at the seams of life, as a kind of image or metaphor that we can use to hold these various feelings generated in Waldoboro together. And it's something I can sense, actually, and show you in two works by Andrew Wyeth, two works painted here in Waldoboro. So the first painting here is called The Carry, and
That's the intruder.
The Intruder, sorry, The Intruder. It is, sorry, I lost, okay. It was painted in 1971. And our perspective in this painting is looking up from a cove on the line between the towns of Waldoboro and Friendship into where the Goose River enters the woods. And interestingly, this painting, The Intruder, has been one of the highest valued Wyeth paintings of all time, having sold in 2007 for almost $6 million.
In Japan.
In Japan.
Yeah, it's in Japan.
I'm glad that they know all about Waldoboro now. Okay, so the second painting, also by Andrew Wyeth, is this painting called The Carry. And it is showing a point where a boat would have to be carried over the rocks of the same river and at the same point as that last painting, The Intruder. However, the perspective here is looking downstream as the water rushes out of the woods and into the cove. So Wyeth painted The Carry, this painting, in 2003, over 30 years after he painted The Intruder at the same site. And The Carry was one of the paintings that the post office used on its Wyeth series of forever stamps in 2017. So it's a popular late Wyeth work. So to me, these two paintings conjure something of the different qualities, feeling states, demeanors of Waldoboro, and so much of Waldoboro's history, not only at that spot, but in the area as a whole. So on the left, you have feelings of the unknown and the need for security, defense. There's a heightened awareness represented. And on the right, feelings of, let's say, maybe freedom, power, and potential, and the magisterial beauty of nature. So it's my sort of hypothesis that, or I would say claim, that we stand and move within the space of all these different qualities, feelings, and demeanors, and that they as a whole constitute Waldoboro as a historical space. So I say historical space because, usually we think about history as what happened before, with people today only marching forward in time. But I want to consider how time is a space that we as a community continue to inhabit. So people are born and die, they come and go, but the historical space remains. So in this space, we make a home and a livelihood. And it is in this space that history affects us, whether we know it or not. And I think that the more aware we are of how and where we stand and act within our historical space, and we will see through what feelings and emotions, the more freely we can move as historical beings and harness the potential of the community. And I call this process refeeling community. And it's another way to basically describe the goals of this committee. Refeeling community requires that we open our awareness and feelings to the foundations of Waldoboro as a historical space. And one central way to do that is through archaeology. So now I'm going to, before I talk a little bit more about feelings and emotions, I'm going to turn it over to Harbor.
Awesome.
And he's going to talk about archaeology. So let me just switch the slides to his.
All right, I put together a brief PowerPoint, and Michael will be my clicker.
Oh, waiting. What is a contract?
Just look at that. Thank you, Mike.
Oh, he probably didn't hear that. Could you quickly?
The impetus for that, we'll leave that
wait.
one out. What do you need?
Question, what is a contract archaeologist?
A person who digs square holes for money. Seriously.
Okay,
If there's a condominium project that the state or the federal regulatory context requires archaeology, they would hire, that project would hire
Okay.
an archaeologist or a crew.
okay,
And then they would come in and test that area for indigenous or
Got it.
Euro-American. Mhm.
thank you.
Yeah, leave that
I'll
one out.
jump on a little on
Yes,
that.
go ahead,
It's-
Michael.
It's like any other company, like a construction company. And say they're widening Route 44 and they'll put it out to bid. So Harbor's company will bid on it and I'll bid on it. And you have a team of archaeologists and you go out and you check it for any sort of cultural significance.
Mhm.
And it's, you do it in 10-meter thing. It's all planned out. There's phases to it. It's a whole regimented industry, if you will.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Okay.
All right, leave it right up for a sec. The impetus for developing this committee, kind of in a nutshell, is Waldoboro's own 2018 comprehensive plan. 6 years ago, Waldoboro was required by its comprehensive plan to establish some form of historic relationship through the development of a committee like this. Within that period, however, it took a while to get things rolling. Houses were built, septic systems were constructed, lawns and gardens were landscaped, loam was harvested and gravel pits were dug. And almost certainly some of Waldoboro's archaeology was destroyed. The principal, but hardly the only rationale for the existence of this committee is the need to begin developing a relationship with the community of Waldoboro, that is, its citizenry, which focuses on the community's rich and diverse and extremely vulnerable archaeological resource. Just FYI, most of Waldoboro's archaeology is within 6 inches of the surface. So if you plant petunias, you're going to pop something up. Give you some context there. The loss of a community's history and story will ultimately result, in my opinion, in a community with no identity but the one found within the moment. A community out of touch with who it is, or rather who it was, has very little to anchor it. Its current values and identity will have no relationship to the place as the world changes around it. Its current values and identity will have no relationship, no emotional or cultural stability. It will not have continuity as it moves forward. And a community of people will simply drift. A community's legacy must be built from more than simply nostalgic references. It must be substantive and intentional. It must matter. Otherwise, the community itself will have no cohesion. To one person, the view of the river may be the priority. To another, the forest. To a third, the fresh air. To a fourth, economics. And to still another, the image of a long-lost 5-masted schooner. Yet even within the apparent lack of cohesive identity and values, there may exist still elements of historic continuity and identity. Failer's Corner, Orf's Corners, Seidensparker Pond, Storer Lumber, the old German church, Meeting House Cove, and the tangible remnants of an earlier time in the archaeology slide. From a cultural perspective, historic resources like archaeology help a community to understand who it was and where it came from. The bits and pieces of past lives help a community to feel personally connected within a shared historic commonality. So what is Waldoboro's archaeology? Well, it is many things. Here are a few. It's stone tools, it's hand-forged nails, it's glass beads, it's clamshells, food bone, knives and forks, cups and saucers, it's pottery of all kinds, it's gun flints, it's wells and outhouses, it's cellar holes, it's boatyards, it is fish weirs, it is fortifications, it is churches, and it's cemeteries. Yep. It is cultural material, the things people have left behind, like a fork. Michael? Be they indigenous, European, or African, oppressed or free or enslaved, these things, which are all that's left of this community's earliest people and their lives, are the only tangible evidence of their life ways and habits. Thank you. Their struggles and their challenges are evidenced within the ground. Their faith and their griefs, their hopes and their aspirations are all reflected within this archaeological record. The bits and the pieces of their daily lives, like pottery. Archaeology tells their story like no other source. But where do we find this resource? It is along rivers and lakes and stream margins. It is on islands It is in blueberry barrens. It is in fields. It is in backyards, and it is in front yards, and it is in the forests. Archaeology is in our fields and pastures. This is a site that dates to the 1730s. All it is today is grass. Yep. It is in our front and it's in our backyards. This is behind a house just a few miles up 220 from here. The house site dates to the 1770s. It's found in areas once open, but now reforested and overgrown. Now, a question I get asked, how do you find this archaeology? And the answer is complicated. But in essence, you go where you believe it is, and sometimes that's not easy. Researching the subject matter, whether it's a person or a place, is often very helpful. In some cases, you might actually find a map indicating where a structure was at that time. But you still have to go there and verify that. This particular map was published in 1776, but the actual survey itself was done in the Midcoast in 1772. This is the De Beers map of the coast of Maine. This particular piece is just Waldoboro. Every single little square rectangle on both sides of the river was a building in 1772. Michael? In other cases, we use modern technologies to help identify possible archaeological targets. An unnatural depression, for example, may be the remnant of a cellar. That's a piece of property down near Sampson Cove, or Settlers Cove, as some folks call it. And the depression in the middle is a blockhouse cellar from about 1750. Michael? Other technologies may also help. Drone-mounted cameras assist in seeing a potential site area in a way that we cannot otherwise. This particular location is exactly where Andrew Wyeth painted his
Around the corner.
both paintings.
It's around the corner. Around the corner.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
around the corner, but the reversing falls is right there off the point to the bottom. Michael? In the end, it falls on the archaeologists to actually go to a place and do the testing. If it's a large open area, she or he may set up a series of transects using surveying equipment and test the area systematically. Michael? Ultimately, the archaeologist has to put holes in the ground. Test pits in the region are typically 50 centimeters square or about 1.5 feet square. Test pits, or shovel test pits as they're called alternatively, usually extend only to the subsoil, about a foot around here. But sometimes they have to go much deeper, like in a cellar. Michael? In some cases, a shovel test pit encounters a circumstance that needs to be more fully understood. In this case, a larger test unit was required. This is a flagstone hearth intact, about 25 centimeters below the surface, about 6 inches. And it dates to about 1736. And it has never been plowed, it's never been disturbed. Sitting under the ground near Sampson Cove. Michael? Once a test pit is open, soil is removed by hand with a shovel or a trowel, and the soil is placed in a screen for sifting. The cultural materials seen in the screen are collected and bagged. They are provenienced, so all of the information relating to them is written down and recorded. They are all bagged, and the bags are taken to a lab where they're washed and dried and analyzed and processed in ways that help us to understand what they are. Typically in commercial contract archaeology, where a client pays to have it done, the individuals doing the testing are professionals. But in a circumstance like Waldoboro, where almost all the archaeology is on private land, an unregulated context, by the way, archaeological research is done by a professional with volunteer help and only with landowner permission. Michael? All during testing, records are kept to record what is done and where. After testing is complete, maps are made to illustrate where cultural materials were found and in what quantities. Michael? Mapping cultural materials helps us to understand what people may have been doing on a particular site. In this particular case, at a house site along the Goose River here in Waldoboro, pottery appears to concentrate in two general areas, more so in one than another. This suggests perhaps separate kitchen and eating areas. The kitchen midden, or the dump, has a much higher concentration of broken pottery than the eating area. Perhaps the less dense concentration is from sweeping off little chips of pottery from a porch or a veranda. Michael? Once all field work is complete, and often even while testing is ongoing, the site is returned to its original state. Test pits are backfilled and the sod is replaced. Analysis and possibly reconstruction of cultural materials is often critical in developing an understanding of when the site was occupied and how. Individually, the pieces of this particular bottle do little to tell us when the site was occupied. But once reconstructed, the fragments tell us that we are looking at a site that dates more from 1700 than from later. The shape of that bottle, as you can see, the red line, that's typical of the earliest part of the 18th century. Michael? Pottery is a critical piece of the analysis. Changes in pottery through time help identify when a site was occupied, and the type of pottery helps identify what people were doing. This large piece of a tankard or drinking vessel has an intricate design, and it's specific to about the mid-18th century. Michael? Pottery can also lend insight into aspects of the site's relationship to the broader world, such as trade and other economic realities. This Westerwald or Rhenish stoneware is produced in only one place, Germany. Michael? Historic preservation, which is, as Michael would probably attest, our goal, whether it's limited to contract or larger research agendas, can be many, many things to many, many people. It can be about bringing something back to a certain condition. It can be about keeping something the same and not letting it degrade further. Or it can, for example, be investigation and conservation of what's recovered. Michael? But historic preservation in archaeology requires going into the ground and excavating. That's the only way to learn from it. Yet at the same time, one is destroying the archaeological context. At the same time, the site itself is disappearing. Michael? Archaeology is a finite resource. Unlike books or forests or other resources that can be photocopied or regrown, the only way to benefit by their presence, by the presence of archaeology, is to destroy it. Once excavated and gone, archaeological sites are gone forever. But in destroying them, they can tell us their story and the story of the people who once lived and worked there. Michael? A community must know who it was before it can be anything else. It helps a community understand who it was and where it comes from. Archaeology helps a community to feel connected through a collective historic past. But it takes a concerted effort to educate a community in its commonality. Archaeology can anchor a community so it doesn't feel adrift. Michael? But how to start? The best way is to start smart. Start small. Slowly and methodically go after low-hanging fruit. Never bite off more than one can chew. Too much too soon can lead to being overwhelmed. Archaeology has been here for a long time. There's no hurry. Michael? It is important to take time to learn, to develop an understanding of the context, to make a list, for example, of those areas on which one wishes to focus. Michael? It is important to prioritize and to delegate. I like to begin with the acronym C, small, effective, and achievable. I do that mostly because I work alone. I try not to overdo. A heart attack last August taught me to do that even better. There are great resources here in Waldoboro and in the state of Maine, and even beyond our own borders. They are there. They are willing to help. They simply need an invitation. Michael? And above all else, anytime one undertakes a mission, one must know one's mission and stick to one's mission, avoiding mission creep and rabbit holes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Harbor. And we can open it up for questions about archaeology right now, but I just want to make a few points. One is that we share a lot in common, but our methods are completely different.
Very different, but we complement, I think.
Right. And I think part of this committee is to figure out how archaeology, this very hard evidence, what we can do with that to think about community formation in the present.
Yes.
And I'll speak for a few minutes more about how the question of feeling and emotion is a way to connect the dots here. We also share an interest in basically correcting people's knowledge. I'm sure a lot of people in the room share that, you know, and that is important at a very basic level, that when someone says something, you just have about Waldoboro or about anything, you know, I am interested in saying, oh, so how do you know that? What is it based on? What would you point to? It's not necessarily to prove anyone wrong. It's to create a larger and better picture. So I think that that's just a shared ethic that researchers have in any discipline. And then there's the other shared question about preservation and what is preservation. Some people in the historic preservation world really value returning things to as they looked at a particular year in time. But is that the best kind of preservation that would affect community in a larger sense, which is my interest, which is, again, how do we use archaeology and history to build a better community? And so I think that one of the tasks that we have before us is to rethink preservation and the modes of what it means to preserve something, maybe just through awareness that something happened in this place and how does it affect you? So before I talk a little bit more, does anyone have any questions from the table or the audience about the archaeology for Harbor?
I would just point out, to build on what Michael said, strictly speaking, archaeologists are not historians. They don't write history. They write reports about what they find, especially in the contract world. Very, very clean. This is what we found. This is what it is. This is what it dates to. Thank you very much. Where's my money? That's all we do. And then we move on to another site, and the other one is destroyed because there's a building on it now, or there's a road. So this is why we go in the first place, to take out a percentage. But we may take only, what, 10%, 15%. I've only, in decades of doing contract work, I have only been engaged in one archaeological effort in which we took out 100% of the site. Just one. And it was in Oxford, dated to about 10 to 11,000 years ago. It's the only one. Otherwise, we take less than half. we're there for a few weeks and then we're gone. And then the bulldozers come in. So really, what happens in research is different. We have the rest of our lives to research. But most of the time, archaeologists are about tangible lengths, weights, thicknesses, places, maps, and then people interpret what that might mean for the former occupants, things of that nature. This historians' context, whether it's musicology or whether it's dates and people and whatever that area of history is. Archaeologists tend to be very linear and very dry and succinct with their work. No questions.
Michael, before we get questions from the audience, you and me both have sat in this room many a times, and we don't even have that many people at a selectmen meeting.
Yeah.
So I'd like to have everybody introduce themselves and maybe what brought them to this meeting. I'd like to hear some of that.
Yeah, sure. If you just want to give your first name and just say how you might be interested or what you find interesting, sure. Seth?
Seth Paul, resident for 15 years. Came up from Boston, professional career, blue water sailor, and drove through Waldoboro for years and years and bought gas. And then I finally found the sweet spot down in Gross Neck where I live now. Very interested in what makes our town look like. I've been involved with politics for a long time and don't feel like I've made a lot of progress. But I haven't given up yet. So this is a very new, interesting conception of what it is to look at a community. So it's interesting to see what everybody has to say.
Ships. I've lived in Waldoboro for about 3 years. I live in an old house and I'm always very interested to learn more about previous occupants. Cemetery down the road. So I just find those long ties to community very interesting because that doesn't exist in a lot of places, right? So yeah, I also work in restoration carpentry, so certainly have buildings and people and communities that fit that.
Today, I live a plot, actually, Sylvania site. Always been interested in history, old house there, and stuff. Career. Board, I had a question. How much time do we have? We're done to 7:30 or?
We can go till 7:30. But we might not go to 7.
San Levine, I moved here about a year ago. And they everything you said seems to be like wonderful metaphors about growth and connection, you know, as your past and your future. I think that's really important to understand who we are.
I grew up in a funny old house in Connecticut and grew up in a family that loved history. And I've also lived a very itinerant life. And so I sort of get to a place and want to understand it culturally, historically, to sort of feel grounded. So David and I moved here a little over a year ago. And, so it's a new community for us, but I feel that this kind of work is so interesting because I feel like it helps me to feel grounded in place, in history, and in time. I had just quickly, I had a delightful interaction with one of the gentlemen, the Storer family, because we actually go get stuff for our projects on our property. And we also lived on a piece of land that was a burial site. Actually, there are 2 burial sites on it. And one of them is the Storer family, Catherine Storer, I believe. And also So that store, Waldoboro, this guy was, someone was telling me that, the old German church may have been on our property, and it was put on slides or something and was taken across the river and put it where it is now, although it's probably a very different building now. But that kind of thing is just fascinating. And we just had a really nice interaction about it. He wants to come over and see our property and see if he can find it. Anyway, it's great. It feels like it's ground.
I'm Jim Chabowski. I moved here with my wife not all that long ago as well. And I just find the history of the place very fascinating, what was, what is today. So I went on Michael's history walk and just found that fascinating. So this is actual fiction.
I'm Susan Price, and my kids and I have lived here about 25 years. I live in an old house, 1798, on the Goose River. I love history. I think that I can see a beneficial connection between Harbor and Michael's goals that seem different, but I think they're quite important.
Great.
Any questions?
Any archaeology specific questions? I'm going to talk a little bit more about emotions, and then I'm going to share with you, as you saw on the sheet there, just some ideas that came up with potential projects we could work on. But of course, this is our first meeting, and so I only did that so that you all know this was like a real thing. So we could be doing any number of things though in the future. So let me just talk a little bit about how I've been thinking, and I am speaking loudly just because Harbor's struggling with hearing, so that's why I'm sort of shouting.
You're not shouting.
Oh yeah, Matt, did you have a archaeology question?
Yeah, a really.
Go ahead.
I mean, is it
Speak up.
mandatory that they be destroyed? It feels like a bit of a, and like pun intended, a bit of an antiquated notion that we need to remove everything, catalog it, put it in a drawer somewhere and have it be destroyed. Why destroy it? Why not catalog it, put it back?
Well, the context is unique in the ground to begin with. So the things that are side by side in the ground can't be put back side by side in the ground the way they were when they came out. So you would never be able to replicate the context in the ground as it was developed in 1740s.
Of course not, but by taking it away, you're certainly not putting it.
One more
I don't
time.
know. I guess I don't see, I think it gives us a very great responsibility then.
Yeah.
To catalog those, make them very available to the public. Like, who are we to remove all of that? It's not ours.
Yeah.
To remove.
That's a piece that's usually missing is when contract archaeology gets done. It's usually typically regulatory in its nature, federal, state, whatever that local shoreland zone, something like the pieces and the cultural material as recovered. Usually is put in a box, put in storage somewhere.
But no one's
Um,
never again.
Nobody ever sees it. And I hear what you're saying.
I just don't know how
And I agree. And I think part of our conversation will eventually be about how does this material educate? How do we, I mean, the work I've been doing for 3 years is all by private landowner permission. They own the material. So if they don't want it, stored at the Historical Society and exhibited, then it doesn't. But I always encourage that. I encourage lecturing with the materials. I encourage education with the materials. It has to be destroyed in its contextual relationships in order to even get it in the first place. That hearth that you saw there, I let that remain because there's no point in digging it all up. It has greater value where it is right now. And it was protected and it was resealed. But typically that's not what's done.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be a curmudgeon. I'm just trying to understand why I think this is all very exciting.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Also, just one more quick thing. It feels a lot like, there are a couple mentions of it, but like the history of Waldoboro started with colonial settlement, with European settlement. I mean,
Native.
Well,
Okay.
yes, I mean, that was mentioned a time or two in all of this, but these are like Wabanaki lands that we took.
Oh, yeah.
Most of them. And I think it's really important that there be inclusion and acknowledgement
Yep.
of all of that, because we're bound to
Yeah.
run across all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And certainly it would be very irresponsible to remove those things
Yeah.
without returning them to tribal communities and whatnot.
And that relationship went straight into the colonial period, indigenous right up into European contact and beyond. The glass beads that I mentioned, the trade beads, and a lot of and then Penobscots and allied with the continental militia. We have a very long history here, 10 to 12,000 years. A couple of different cultural groups, one for 10, 11,000 years, and the other for a few hundred, you know. I don't weigh one as greater than the other, but in terms of the ability to locate and understand one, it's much harder. There's much less of it. Ocean rise has destroyed a huge amount of it. Much of what we have left is within the last few thousand years. So sites older than 3,000 or 4,000 years are very rare.
So
indigenous.
I just want to answer those two questions as well. I mean, it is whether fortunate or not that whatever is dug up on your land, you own. You know, and I mean, is that problematic at some level that you find something from 10,000 years ago that it's now yours?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really interesting, but that's development of land ownership. That's also obviously historically problematic. So it is a question of yeah, what do artifacts mean to us in our world today?
Yeah.
But that's a question of, well, what do museums mean to you? What do galleries mean to you? What do historical societies mean to you? You know,
the trend of decolonizing museums now, it's very different, where a lot of those museums are horrified by what they've kept in their shelf for a long time that were stolen.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and they are decolonizing. I think we need to be really aware of contemporary thought here.
Yeah.
And how we.
Absolutely.
Right. So I was trained in today's contemporary world in all the fields that are doing indigenous work and work of silenced or oppressed populations throughout certainly settler colonial histories. My work in terms of emotions and feelings is to develop a framework to hear Native voices and other voices. So that is what is animating this entire project.
Yes.
I'm very familiar with all the history of Native America. It's what's most interesting about it is its methodology. Because the evidence is harder to come by, because you're dealing with larger spans of time, a lot of the scholarship that's coming out of work on Native communities is more imaginative, is asking questions of feelings and emotions. But it so happens that that's also the key way that we can begin to relate to people who are different than us. And if you come on my walking tour, I talk about the history of the Sylvania site in terms of Native American presence and the interaction of settlers with natives. I also think it's important to recognize, though, that how we assess what has been erased and not talked about informs how we act in the world today, as you're suggesting, you know. So, you know, in terms of how we govern, if we have a growing awareness of different uses of the land, does that alter laws that we might make? I mean, sure. I mean, there are real big implications to these questions, but I think what we have to do is like find a way to move towards those step by step. Because I think a lot when people talk about them, they talk about them very broadly as saying it is a good thing to do that. But my question is, how do you get there? How, you know, I'm sorry, but it's not enough to say we are now operating on the land of those tribes. What does that mean to these tribes anymore? I mean, what are you actually doing to acknowledge your presence, you know? So I'm going to talk about at the end another way to acknowledge that we're on the land of natives. So I'll get to that in 1 second. Okay, so I just want to talk about connecting what Harbour said in terms of archaeology with feelings and emotions. Archaeology deals with like basic essential questions of human life and experience. And so I feel like the archaeological discoveries, including the native stuff that you've uncovered at our place just last week, gives us an opportunity to sort of feel into the questions of human settlement and development that we all share. So for example, how would I approach these archaeological resources? I think we can all relate to the basic coordinates of some of our deeply felt investments in the worlds that we live in. So with each archaeological or other research find, we can consider our relationships to the land, right? So where is this site? What kind of land is it? Are we looking at something that's built there? And what did the land look like around the building? The actions of clearing and demarcating, digging, moving rocks, fencing, building, ordering. These are not simply actions. They're driven by feelings of ownership, replacing others who were there before, bringing a certain ethics of care and growth. And then you begin to ask questions about, well, at any one site, who else is around, or who do people think is there? Will they help you? Will you help them? Why not? Could they take what you have away from you? Where is authority located? Is anyone telling you what you can and cannot do? Does someone own anything over you? Do you own something over another? All of these questions we can begin to answer with the archive that we already have, not archaeologically, but in the manuscripts. We know that the Germans thought this about authority and power, and the English Puritans thought differently. And those are real differences that then manifest in the formation of our community now. We know that certain ethnicities in early America got along with tribes better than others. How do we braid that into the archaeological work that we're doing in terms of the site being found there and not here? And how over time that helps characterize that spot and imbue the community that forms around it. So on those who came on the tour, I came up with a word called fieldscapes, which are the basic loosely organized building blocks of, and now it's cut off there on the end, of historical space. And so I identified these 6 fieldscapes that I've listed for you as well, as something that we all negotiate, no matter who you are and what time you lived. Like, these are questions that we all negotiate. And so it's a way for me to think about any historical moment, how natural resources were used, who thought the neighbor was a problem or a help, what were the traditions of homemaking, where was power located? And of course, all of these have a particular articulation in the area of Maine that we live in. And then they're inflected by all of these different ethnic traditions and reasons for moving here and settling. So it's a way into thinking about how feelings and emotions arrange and sort of construct our world as we live in it. And for me, that's what history is bringing together these basic questions of our life and arranging them through how we feel about other people and our place in the world. So much so that it begins to characterize a family, a community, and before you know it, 3 generations later, you're still feeling in similar ways about others and about your home life, affecting the community that we live in today.
Can I just interject?
Yeah, go ahead.
How many people think Massachusetts is a great place? When it ran Maine, nobody. Today, there's a word for people with Massachusetts license plates. And it ain't pretty. Why is that? 200 years of Massachusetts running Maine. I was a United Methodist pastor for 10 years before I retired. Our conference center is in Boston. And yet it tells Maine who goes where and when. Maine used to be independent in the United Methodist system until it became a conglomerate. Massachusetts has been influencing Maine for hundreds of years in the pre-colonial to colonial period. that affects us. It affects who we are today, how we feel, how we react, how we respond to one another when we say out-of-staters. That kind of thing is, I think, part of what Michael is trying to get at here. It can be multi-generational over centuries,
Right.
and that defines us
Yeah.
as a community.
And what I'm also saying is that the more sort of archaeological record we build up, the more we can increase our historical awareness and imagination of the people who lived here and dealt with the same questions, but maybe answered them differently.
Yes.
And I think that's really important, that it's not simply a one-way street, that there were many responses to these conditions, and how, as a community today, can we revisit some of the other, let's say, more open, capacious responses of living in the world with other people? And how are we better able to feel into that reality the more we know that, oh, right there was a church. It was a Lutheran church. And right next door was the Moravian church. They didn't get along. The Historical Society has just received a new English translation of the Moravian minister who worked here in the early 1760s, giving a historical account of his relations with everyone in the community, and how the other pastor of the Lutheran church was sending people over to beat him up because he was preaching differently than them. The document is full of emotions. He's talking about how afraid he is to be here, but he's going to believe in God because it's going to give him the strength to survive. What we're seeing there is not just one guy's experience. He is sort of bringing to the surface these basic emotional relationships that structured three different Protestant sects in the 1750s and 60s here, that then completely informed the relationship between not just within the German community, but the Germans and the English that formed the town we live in today. So it is all right there at our origins. And the more we can think about it, broadly speaking, as these basic human questions of relations, through more and more evidence, through more detail, the more I feel like we can just, see the world more openly. It's as simple as that, actually. So I just want to say two more things, because I know we're wrapping up and we want to leave a little room for discussion. Is that I've been developing these ideas about how to bring in history. On the tour I gave, I talked a lot about the Sylvania site, and how just on that concrete pad there was a Moravian family that owned that lot. They left for North Carolina because they had it with everyone else around here. Then that land was bought by Benjamin Brown, who was an English Federalist. He became a U.S. congressman. He lived in the ritziest house in Waldoboro. It was right on that concrete pad, the same exact location. He was very progressive. He inoculated the town against smallpox. He helped start the first school in the village. But he also brought 2 slaves with him. And the Federalist Puritans of the time were supportive of a slavery culture that had to do with our economy being wrapped up with the Southern shipping economy that obviously is tied in with the slavery. 100 years, at the end of the 19th century, Benjamin Brown lived there in the early 19th century, end of 19th century. His house was bought by future Maine Governor Sebastian Marble, who happened to be the first anti-slavery Republican in Waldoboro in the 1850s. When Waldoboro was called a Copperhead town, it was heavily pro-slavery. This guy came out as anti-slavery. He lived in the same house as Benjamin Brown. He lived right there. And then, of course, that's the site of Sylvania. You know, the latest peak of job opportunities in our town. And it's planned to be the future site of parks and recreation. Think about how many different emotions have existed on that spot in ways that have shaped the community at large. So what would it mean for people just to think about those layers, that this community, as you feel it today, has not been the same? And as you feel today, it's made up of many different feelings. And you have to be aware of how feelings can be destructive, but also, and it can open people up to new ideas and new ways of living. So obviously there's a lot more to say, and you could, look through my handout. I was just been developing ideas. Feel free to meditate on it all and ask me questions and be a part of this conversation. I also included in the sheet all sorts of tools we could develop as a committee. I mean, from just the study of our history. I mean, whether it's thematically through primary sources, through families, more kinds of fieldscape walks as I was offering at different areas around town. There's a lot of interesting work happening in historic preservation using 3D visualization on your iPhone. So you move your phone around a space and all of a sudden the space looks like it did 100 years ago and then 200 years ago before that. What would it mean to do a tour where we see how Waldoboro looked in the 1750s when people lived in the 5 military garrisons? Because all around them, there were native people who were attacking. Okay. What would it mean to then ask questions about, gosh, my neighbor feels very different now, or there's no boundaries, there's no property lines, right? What ideas does this trigger in you in thinking about a new way of seeing the world we inhabit today? So for me, like that's a more constructive way of dealing with the question of native relations, than what we're seeing just as a claim that we need reparations or something like this. And I feel like there's opportunities to bring in oral histories with members of our community. We could weave in stories through these tours and make them audio tours. We can work on cleaning up some of the cemeteries, the old cemeteries, and think about what questions that brings up. And we can work in collaboration with the Historical Society on presenting objects in a way that speak to larger themes of the community. And of course, all of this can impact how we design our paths and walkways through town. It impacts what buildings we as a community might want to preserve and what that looks like. It impacts the people working on land conservation, where there are also archaeological sites, but also that aesthetics and land appreciation is a reason people have moved here, and it also produces all sorts of emotions that makes us want to be here. Recreation being a huge part of this too. So anyways, there's a lot of potential here. And we just wanted to introduce it to everyone on the committee and who came here today. Yeah, does anyone have anything else to offer? I don't want to keep people past 7:30. So let's just discuss or just share any thoughts you might have.
One of the goals for me of being on this committee and what I hope happens, and probably not for many years, but is that the community of Waldoboro has a pride in who we are, who we came from, and our history. And we can narrate that story. I was just thinking about the Wyeth 2 sites. There's an opportunity for people who are interested in Wyeth to come to Waldoboro and sort of look, this is where this was painted. I've been to some other meetings here about how do we grow Waldoboro? How do we increase revenue? But I think as opposed to building another Sylvania in the middle of Waldoboro, can we make Waldoboro an interesting cultural, historical town that people are drawn to? Because we have so many interesting things to share with them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a historian of America. I mean, I think Waldoboro has a lot to tell us about America at large. How communities have formed and what kinds of communities those are. Can Waldoboro be a kind of historical laboratory for the understanding of the deeper American past? That is completely doable with the resources we have here. No other town is thinking that way. And I think that it just means, being aware of history in a broader sense. It's not just in the books, it's all around you. Yeah, Carolyn.
I am thinking, it feels like I'm one of the long timers in Waldoboro. Most of most of the people here have only been in Waldoboro a couple of years. And yet I feel like I'm a newcomer to Waldoboro because I know people who were born here and raised and all of that sort of thing. So I think a lot of it, I would like to see long timers' stories and their viewpoints. Not telling them how they should feel, but just finding out what
Yeah.
they do feel.
Mhm.
Even on Dutch Neck, there's political undercurrents to lots of things that you can sort of ignore or you can think about it. And
There's gotta be tons of great stories that we don't know about.
oh, right.
Yeah, and people are dying. I mean, it's also as simple as that, you know? I mean,
Right.
just recording, just getting someone to talk for 2 hours, asking questions, getting information. You don't have to use it right away, you know, but you got to have it. You have to build an archive. Have to build an archive to use.
I don't know if anybody saw the 250th production that LCTV did for us when we had the celebration last year. They put together an hour of the weekend festivities. Well, in it, we talked to certain older individuals in town, and they was asked about their memories. At least we've got that disc of 5 people now that talked about growing up in Walton.
Yeah, and even
Yeah.
one thing, is useful. You
Yeah.
don't need 500 interviews, you know? But also, I just want to follow up with the archaeology that, you know, the committee itself is not doing archaeological research, but Harbor is doing it, and I also participate, and anybody can volunteer to help do archaeological research with Harbor, or we could talk about, you know, doing it on other land with the landowners. So that is a huge happening, but it's just, it's not an official task of the committee. But we are
Actually,
using,
the committee,
Get you.
we are using
Yeah,
it. So the more people who can be involved in that, the better.
I do think it's important to emphasize that the committee itself is not designed to build data sets and to go into the field and to extract those data, or to physically do the kind of work that Michael is envisioning, this somewhat lofty but doable reality. I think my understanding is we're here to facilitate that. We're here to
Yeah.
emphasize it. We're here to partner with it. We're here to engage and invite community into a dialogue around what's important, why it's important, what it means for us. And in order to do that, some of the data has to be developed.
Right.
So how we end up helping that happen is a conversation that's much more complex.
And, you know, we all have to kind of teach ourselves about the history as much as possible, you know, because the more information you have, the more informed our discussions can be. So although we're facilitating understanding, it has to be informed by some knowledge base. So that's a thing that we're going to kind of have to just juggle, you know, which is like, you know, what can you share? Should we as a committee, you know, sort of read one thing together and discuss it? Should there, you know, there's any number of ways we can approach it. So I think maybe for the next meeting, we should all just think about, you know, how we want to do that balance. Like what kind of research or knowledge gathering do we want to do? Is that separate? Is that together? Should we reserve this time just for discussing larger themes about how this impacts today's world of Waldoboro? You know what I'm saying? So like, there's a lot of different directions, how we can divide up the meeting. So everyone should just sort of think about that now that you know there's like 5 different plates spinning at once here, and we're juggling it like this.
And I think each of us has some skill set that can be brought to this table in ways that are very different and perhaps unique.
Exactly.
And I think so, you know, between the 5, 6 of us, we ought to be able to come up with models of how to move into the future with ideas and whether cooperative or independently, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and what's important now and what can wait.
Yeah,
you know,
prioritize.
I mean, we do live in a world of like very contentious issues, you know. I mean, some people feel like we should be talking about one thing because it has more of an impact now, and something else can wait, you know. So that's a very valid
How do we, as opposed to being internal, how do we externalize the work we're doing?
Yes.
Always keeping that in mind.
Yes. And of course, all the meetings are open to the public. So technically then we're going to have sort of an agenda where like there'd be a citizen comments portion, You know, but if people want to join, they should just join the committee. You could just be on the committee too. I really invite that, you know, tell your friends. Yeah.
That's part of our mission, your mission, but you know, as community members, if you could consider occasionally, it's a big ask, but you know, presenting findings annually to the community, have an open thing about the history of Waldoboro, like, here's what we did for the past year. Ooh, down here, you found this and that. And this, I mean, you know, some community engagement, because everyone's a little.
Well, there is
Everyone's a little
Waldoboro Day.
interested in this, you know.
Yeah, everyone is very interested, yeah.
And there's also the Broad Bay Family History Association weekend where we get together and.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's already happening.
No, but I mean, it's a good point though you make, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening, but it's not kind of organized centrally. There's a lot of energies that people have. We're trying to bring them together. And I think by making it a committee within the town, it's just a structural way of organizing activities and energies in a way that can easily direct people somewhere, you know?
Does it make sense to have someone from the Waldoboro Historical Society on this committee?
Bill's the president of the Historical
That's right.
Society.
And I'm a
And
member.
Carolyn's a member.
Right.
We're all actually members, yeah.
Pretty much
We're
everybody.
overrepresented in the
Everybody
Historical
does.
Society.
There you
Yeah.
go. Good idea.
Yeah, Susan.
Question about cemeteries. I have there is a very, very old and in horrible shape cemetery that is right off my property line. It's way back in the woods.
Where's this at?
Um,
A cemetery.
the cemetery, it is,
Off Wagner Ridge,
no, it's, off Pitcher Road.
Pitcher Road.
It's off
There's
Friendship.
banners.
It's a Pitcher Cemetery.
Yeah, there's banners.
That's a Pitcher
pictures.
house it's next to. I think
It
it's
was a
Able-
picture house and then it was moved.
Yeah, I think it was Able Pictures.
Well, John Pitcher was the last pitcher that recently died.
This is way back.
Oh, okay, yeah, and I live in a house, the house that I live in is.
So you're gonna
private
say
pictures.
the cemetery is in deplorable
It's
condition.
horrible.
It has been since I started 35 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, this is, well, we want to have a larger discussion about cemeteries because a lot of these cemeteries are on private land, but some of them are actually covenanted that the landowner can't do anything on them. So does that give access for a cleanup?
What do you mean
know?
they can't do anything? Anybody can cut bushes and whack weeds.
No, but you can't like dig up.
Well, no, a little common sense prevails.
Well, I know, but I'm saying, but
You
I'm
don't walk into a cemetery.
no, but I'm just saying, how do we navigate the laws in a way that, you know, how do we navigate the laws in a way that allow us to clean up and bring
First of all,
attention?
it's the landowner you have to get permission from.
Yeah.
Well, first and
So-
foremost,
well-
there are state regulations
Yeah.
around veterans and other issues that relate to cemeteries. So one of the educational pieces for, say, this committee would be to help understand those kinds of
Yeah.
relationships first. And then understand that landowners can, for instance, if there's a veteran, or let's say my grandfather
All
was in.
you're trying to do is whack the weeds off.
Don't
the
interrupt me,
stone.
please. I can't hear.
Okay.
If my grandfather's in a cemetery on your land, I can come visit him anytime, but I do need to schedule it with you.
You need.
And so
permission, yes.
there are regulatory relationships to things like that. And so it's really important for, I think, educational purposes first, for committee to be able to answer questions correctly,
Yes.
instead of just here's how we think it is, or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Bill?
yeah.
Maybe one of your meetings, Michael, we could have it focused just on cemetery.
Yeah, completely.
And invite,
Yeah.
the German church, Tim
Yeah.
Weston's
Yeah,
and
cemeteries,
head of that,
yeah,
and then,
yeah.
you know, we could
Great idea.
discuss. We've got the books at the museum, I could bring them up.
Yeah.
We could go,
I've seen, yes, I've
you
seen
know,
that.
we.
Yeah, there's a
Just
record.
Vote to how to take care of some
Yeah.
cemetery.
Okay, any last comments? Well, thank you all for being here. I know it's a lot that we're trying to do, but we have to start somewhere. So I really appreciate the questions and the
Thank you, guys.
encouragement and the energy.
Very exciting.
It's
a learning process.
Waldoboro's
we meet monthly on the third Monday at 5. It was only tonight's meeting that had to be 6 because
Okay. At 5.
yeah, third Monday at 5. Yes.
A lot of time to go over to all kinds of meetings and participant and chairman. 5 is a very difficult time for an awful lot of people because of work schedules. So I would
Huh.
advise you to think maybe an hour later. There's a reason almost all meetings start at 6 or 7. There
Okay.
really is.
Would people,
Yeah, I was the one who griped
would
about it.
people be
but
okay with 6?
I think probably you're right, that
I think
for work,
six is
for work
probably
stuff.
fair.
Okay.
6 is
That's
probably
fine.
better, not later than that.
Okay, we will do third Mondays at
Half a peanut
6.
butter sandwich before I'll have another half later.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
everybody.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you all. We did it. Now we're off.
That's it. No.
A lot.
Time to finish something.
Yeah.
That's right. No, I know. It's just, it's like, I've been dealing with these questions for people for like 20 years. Oh, yeah. I'm on it.
Oh, no, and
Okay.
No.
2016, we bought our property.
I know. Foreground certain things.
Moved up full time.
And we actually live on the property where the intruder and the carry were painted. That's our property.
Yeah.
Are you on the other side of the river or you're upstream?
Yeah, no.
Upstream.
You know, yeah, I hear it. No, I
In
agree.
Is yours the slope
No.
and
Yes.
walk across from Michael and Conrad's property?
Okay, no, thank you.
They're our next door neighbors.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So, yeah, so I'm working on that. Oh,
I
you
know, I've seen it. I've
Oh,
seen
you've
it.
been there?
I've been there.
Oh,
Yeah.
you really, I'd love to show it to you, like direct one-to-one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So, and we'd love to have you come to our land.
So you're upstream or downstream from the actual reversing falls?
That is we are,
Across, directly across from the point.
so here's the reversing falls.
Yes.
Here's the cove. Our house is right here. So this is all our property.
Oh, okay, so they're at the way at the head of the cove.
Right, so we're connected.
You're on the, oh.
Yeah, we're on,
see.
yeah, so they're at the point of the cove.
So you own the Benner Cemetery?
7.
No, that's in between,
A
our
little strip.
little strip in.
All right, yes.
Where,
I know where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I look across and I